volatility and consistently high energy prices. So while in the near term, the pharma space does have certain events such as the India as well as the US elections to navigate, the larger goal of the pharmaceutical industry of the country remains growing to around $130 billion by 2030 and a further $500 billion by 2047. All this led by innovation-led growth. That's basically the focus of the government as well. To discuss these themes along with the key buzzwords from cell gene therapy, M&A, GLP-1, artificial intelligence, we have a very reputed panel with a lot of industry veterans. So I'm not going to delay anymore and start discussing the topic and delve further into more detailed analysis of the pharmaceutical space. Everybody, welcome to the panel. Mr. Reddy, I'm going to start with you. The topic today is that geopolitical imperatives, it's important for geopolitical imperatives to reorganize the global drug supply chain. We have two wars we are dealing with, one which just completed 2 years. We have high interest rates. Do you think that those are the key challenges for supply chains? What are the kind of disruptions you faced this year?
Sure. So I think when it comes to the supply chain, the problem started getting aggravated and also come into the limelight, especially during COVID. That's when it started, and then the two wars that you're talking about, and maybe the possibility of a third one. So hopefully it won't happen. I don't think it'll happen, but if it happens. So if you see the disruptions, the way it happened, especially during COVID, it's on several fronts. Clearly, I think it exposed some of the shortcomings because I think each country was acting in its own interest, and that led to a huge disruption. I mean, the COVID pandemic itself, in terms of the challenges that it put forth, obviously, caused a disruption because when it came to the supplies, there's one thing I think it exposed was a dependence, right? So countries all across, whether it was India, whether it was US, this dependence on the key starting materials and APIs, I think that got exposed on one front. Also, the actions taken by certain countries, for example, if they restricted it or even created some kind of an export ban. India also did it for a short while. So I think that caused concerns. For example, you saw that happening. Logistics, because of the disruption in especially airlines and the sea routes, that caused a major disruption. So all in all, I think it was a huge thing. Operationally, I think that's something all of us companies faced. Because of the uncertainty it created. In terms of the atmosphere during that time, that completely, I think, changed everything during COVID times. What got aggravated, but because once we, survived that, was also, I think, the two wars that you talked about. The Russian war to begin with, that caused quite a bit of disruption. And then now the current war, especially Israel and, Gaza, and also the logistics disruption that it created, especially, the shipments coming through Suez Canal and all that it's a major thing because these are things now I think countries and companies are prepared to deal with these eventualities and saying what else can they do. Obviously, any kind of a crisis comes with an opportunity. There are also things which companies and also countries have done to address these kind of supply chain disruptions and how to deal with them. But certainly this has created a big situation here.
Okay. Well, Dr. Chava, maybe, I could get your thoughts on it because one of the key challenges that you had actually pointed out or, your annual report points out is untamed inflation and input costs. Now that we do have some kind of disruptions possibly from the Red Sea and the two wars that we're speaking about, do you think that's a big risk and is there any input cost volatility that you envisage?
The input costs I would say currently are under control. The biggest challenge is logistics, not the cost alone. What is also happening when the world order was good, things are fine. People used to buy starting metal from China and intermediates are made in India. Intermediates goes to Europe and then they make API, and they used to send API to somewhere else for formulation, somewhere else for labeling, package, serialization and all. Those luxuries are gone now. Because of the logistics challenges, people would like to go to a player where they can do integrated. That means they can do starting materials, intermediates, APIs, and formulations. And that's the trend happening. But input costs generally are under control right now. In some cases, it is worrisome wise lower. That means if any RM cost goes much lower, I think this is also dangerous. So I think some costs are very low right now.
Well, one of the themes which also emerged or could possibly be emerging because of the change that is taking place, say when it comes to geopolitics, is the power shift. Maybe a little less dependence on China, maybe a little more dependence on India. The China plus one strategy, which I think a lot of people were very hopeful of post-COVID-19 to become more scalable and formidable for Indian companies. Ms. Nevatia, has that come through from a global standpoint? Is the China plus one factor actually played out post-COVID?
You're asking me?
Ms. Nevatia, and then Dr. You can answer it right after.
So Ekta, I think it's a good question. I think the way I would approach it is we've taken good steps in that direction, but I wouldn't say we are there yet. Just reflecting on that whole approach for us in Pfizer, or maybe in a more multinational perspective, definitely the conversation about can you source it in India is happening on every occasion for every product. So that I see is a very good sign, at least for us, because we are very consciously discussing can we source it in India. In fact, almost 70% of what we sell in India, we are now making in India, and that number will only increase as we progress. So I think those are very good indicators. When I look at our API supply, a lot of them indirectly are coming from India, and even our entire supply chain organization is spending a lot more time in India meeting suppliers. So it's moving in that direction. Are we there? Probably not, but are we moving in that direction? Absolutely yes. And at least for us, what's important is we are very much actively evaluating options to bring even more products that historically we did not bring to India, into India to manufacture in India, even at the time of launch. So it's not just products that have been in the market for a long time, but even new launches, we are at least beginning to think, can we even make it in India pre-launch so we can launch it from an India-made product? Okay. So I feel good about that, yeah.
Dr. Chava, you wanted your insights on this?
I think it is very obvious for many big pharma to diversify their vendor base. I think I was also participating in the previous panel session. They were talking about India plus one strategy also. Nobody would like to depend on India 100%. So like China plus one, Europe plus one. Actually, many companies are also getting opportunities from Europe because they want to capture the higher end of the value chain. So they are not making the intermediates where they were supposed to make earlier. So those are coming to India. Like that, every country will only go to a certain threshold. Beyond that, it is difficult. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Stoffel, you look at it from a larger scale. Advent has, investments across different value chains across the world in terms of companies. Do you think that China plus one is an opportunity for India? How much does India probably need to scale up to match the requirements as well?
I absolutely think there is an opportunity, let's call it that way, but I would...
This mic is not on.
Is it now working? Yes. I absolutely think there is an opportunity to grow business in India. China plus one, certainly one movement that companies consider, but I still also think the whole supply chain challenge interruption that caused had a significant rethinking on how companies approach their procurement. And here, I believe India, with the talent pool, with the existing capacity, is well positioned to take this journey on. A key element I see is certainly to try to climb up the value chain, maybe going to Europe, grab these type of businesses, but do it ruthlessly with backward integration. And with that, the dependency on suppliers is greatly diminished, and the supply security is improved. And I believe there is a sweet spot for India in that, and I would also expect that relative to the overall CDMO business globally, India will pick up and grow faster.
Okay. Well, Nandini, while we are discussing China plus one as an opportunity, the other point is our own supply chain resilience, where we've spoken about how we should probably become more resilient when it comes to APIs. We still have a large dependence on China. How important is it to have that supply chain resilience, and how are companies working towards that?
I think it's incredibly important for each customer, for each company to say that they want at least multiple sources for each of their products. And I think companies have been going down one by one across all their purchasing to say, can I have a multiple source? Can I have a 2-continent or 3-continent supply strategy so that I can balance across price and availability and speed?
Okay. Mr. Reddy, what about you? Is India even becoming more resilient in terms of the supply chain? The government has taken initiatives such as the PLI scheme, but is that showing on the ground?
Sure. So I think there's more to be done. Obviously, in response to what happened during COVID, various measures have been taken. One, in terms of how Nandini described corporations diversifying their supply chain, so that helped. But it also had the other problem of adding on to the costs, right? So that's something we have seen. But then on the larger point, if I were to say, it's like, why did we even reach this stage? Because there was a time, where the country was leading in APIs. Even a company like us, we're leading in major APIs. But then it all changed towards late 90s when we started buying from China.
Yeah.
Right. So obviously, I think this writing on the wall was always there to say that it's like we have become import dependent. There was also, I think, way back in 2014, there was a Katoch committee report which pointed out all these issues, and then there was a policy change that was recommended to the government. Obviously, not much had happened, since that time. But I think the COVID crisis, I think, spurred the government to action. But maybe it started a bit late. That's the larger perspective I would give, saying that, it's like, are we really there? There's still lots more work to be done. PLIs, you specifically said. I think the first policy which came out, I think, while it was done with the right intention, it did not find that many takers to begin with, on the APIs part of it, right? So, and then the PLI 2 came, which was very well structured, very well, received by everybody. So that again benefited the industry a lot. So they would take those risks into investing, to a certain extent, although it was again into different segments besides APIs. But then if you put all these things together, I'm saying that in terms of a concerted policy effort that needs to be done continuously, it needs to take the industry into confidence, and then things need to happen. For example, I would say industrial parks, right? We are starting on that effort now. What if this was done, say maybe 5 years ago? We would have been in a much more enviable position. But then there's another issue also to be discussed, which is to say, so what does China have? It has scale, right? It moves very, very fast in terms of what needs to be done. There's also a major, incentive structure from the government by which it has built those economies of scale to a degree where I think India has to do a lot more and has to be a lot more creative if we have to be competitive on that front. That would be one part of it. But I think in terms of an opportunity, I think this is the right time, because there are a lot of countries, there are a lot of companies. I think Meenakshi also just alluded to that. They're looking very closely at India at this point of time. If we were to take that opportunity, I think the time is now. Before it shuts out, I think India needs to do a lot more.
But what about the scale part of it? Do we need to build up scale in order to compete?
Let me put it this way. I think the capabilities are there, right? So a lot of these moves, especially when they say that, they're looking at these industrial parks and all that, I think lots more of that is needed. China went through this phase at one point of time where they built such huge capacities. I think it'll take time before we get there.
Okay.
As far as
Dr. Chava, what would your thoughts be in terms of possibly the top 3 recommendations to the government in order to help make the supply chain for Indian companies more resilient?
The biggest hurdle for life science industry is lack of trained talent. Although we say we produce millions of STEM graduates, but here most of the STEM graduates are more inclined towards engineering, because every engineer is a software engineer in the country. So, but nobody takes science as a education preference, especially chemistry or biology and all. Those are the last preferences. If we are saying we want to increase the focus on life sciences. Unless we in the sense, entire companies, society, government invest heavily into skilling graduates in science, this industry will suffer. So we want to grow by 1 lakh crores in the next, say, 10 years, 15 years. So an employee can generate certain amount of revenue, say 50 lakhs to 1 crore. So every crore needs 1,000 people. So every 10 billion needs 1,000 people. So if you want to say 100 billion more revenue, you need that many people to be joining industry and thriving on this. So that is one big challenge for the country. The second is availability of well-built and well-equipped industrial areas. So you have industrial areas close to the residential areas or far away from the residential areas. So attracting talent to the industrial areas which are far away is also challenging, and running industries which are close to residential areas is also very challenging. And there are no new industrial areas coming up. If you go to China, you see massive industrial areas, and every industrial area has a cogen plants. And here, we don't have any industry with reasonable size cogen. So government is not thinking scale. Government is not really looking at scale to compete China. And Chinese pharmaceutical industry thrives on success of chemical industry there. The significant portion of the world chemical industry is dominated by China. But India, we are not doing that. Our chemical industry is still at the very infancy stage right now. So that is one. Availability of starting materials is a big challenge for this. And third is the government commitment to invest in this sector. That is also required.
Ms. Nevatia, one of the key themes which is played out is also, or is hopeful of playing out, is digitization, which would probably help in terms of supply chain efficiency. Are we seeing that on the ground, and what are the key takeaways in terms of, say, how digitization could probably help make a more resilient supply chain?
So, Ekta, I can comment from not just the manufacturing, but supply chain beyond manufacturing, right? So, for example, one thing that we've started doing is, in order to reduce the risk of, to add more flexibility, let me put it like that, we've started creating what we call postponement sites. What these are is that we get neutrally packaged products till almost the last mile, and then we package specifically for India, for Thailand, for Vietnam, so that you're increasing the, the time when it becomes an India pack is at the last stage. So that requires a lot of digital support, because our entire systems to decide what supply I can get for India versus what Thailand will get, we've reduced to the last minute now. So things like that are really helping us, because we can then add a lot more flexibility. We can source at short notice, because we've got these neutral packs sitting at a hub somewhere in Asia. Secondly, on cold chain products, again, digitization helps a lot, because earlier we used to literally, our pneumococcal vaccines used to get packed in these containers and they used to be shipped all over the country. Now we are able to do it again at the last mile. So what I would say is, in the supply chain that is beyond the factory, in terms of distribution, the digitization is helping a lot to reduce inventory, to reduce supply times, and to just add a lot more flexibility to us as a company, which in turn reduces costs. So definitely a big role. Second, when it comes to sourcing, of course, I think my colleagues here can probably talk much more to that. But the role of, I won't say the role of AI yet, but the role of digitization is all pervasive across all our companies. Yeah.
Mr. Stoffel, how much investment is actually going into digitization of the supply chain now? And, companies which you have investments in, how actively are they taking it up?
I'm more coming out of the CDMO space. I spent 35 years at Lonza, so I can more speak to that end. And I see here digitalization certainly a core element that is going on, yet the security of supply cannot be it can be enabled, improved, but it cannot be digitized. So I think there are elements that need to be put in place that first and foremost work hand in hand to avoid shortcomings and again make the whole supply chain less complex. I think companies recognized in that they have scattered their sourcing and to so many different companies. I see that almost every single one out there has the target to simplify their supply chain. And I think in that, again, the attractiveness and opportunity for India comes that this moment or this movement is going on, and I give that much higher chances to make a difference and an impact. And I would call, again, AI an enabler more than anything else.
Okay, well, AI is an enabler. Nandini, you've spoken about how your client wants one certain part of a production in a facility in India and then the next in the UK, so an integrated model per se. So based on that integrated model, the supply chain probably becomes even more important in terms of resilience and digitization. How are you handling that piece?
So I think that's the benefit of an integrated supply chain for the customer, because then you are dealing with the hassle rather than them. And then you can price for that. But that's, I think, one of those, it's a benefit that you give to people because they don't have the capacity and the capability to quite often handle that, or they don't want to. And again, that's a service that you can offer to the customer.
Okay. Well, Mr. Reddy, now this is about the supply chain, but the larger picture about the Indian healthcare space is basically moving from volume to value. We've spoken about $130 billion, which is a huge task from the $50 billion that we are at today. We're looking at that probably in 2030, and then maybe even $500 billion by 2047. How much of that is going to be a generic story?
So obviously it's not going to be just the generic story, because that's where our strength is. There is still enough room to, continue to grow in that space, but that won't get you to the numbers that we're talking about. So clearly we have to move up the value chain, and clearly it says that innovation is a key component to that. Again, there are things in between, for example, biosimilars, specialty, generics, complex generics. I mean, that's again, I would put it as part of the generic scale. But the real value would come only when we shift to innovation. Right, so and that's where I think the task ahead is really that difficult, and also I think but it's a very focused effort by the lot of companies in India at this point of time, who have taken this bet, not now but quite a while ago. I mean, I can just give an example of Dr. Reddy's story, because we were one of the first to get into this in the private space way back in 92, 93, around that time, and then we had early success. But it also painted out the uncertainty, right? So that whole class of PPAR, class of compounds, went into a cloud, and then we had to completely stop that. But then we started again, and then currently it's Origin Oncology, the wholly owned subsidiary of Dr. Reddy's, focused on immuno-oncology, and that's where we have almost like close to 19 different products in the pipeline, and we continue to keep developing. It requires a lot of perseverance, it requires a lot of investment, it involves a lot of risk-taking, but still it clearly shows that we have the capabilities, because from what we started with to where we are, we see that it's definitely a progress, because it's, in terms of financing itself, Origin is able to do that, because it follows a licensing model also, so the income that comes from that, we are able to continue other programs and also invest into it. But it's not enough. I think that's the key thing, because when you look at a target of saying that, it's like we want to be, the numbers that you talked about, 2030, $150 billion or so, and then saying, by 2047, we want to, grow much bigger. Clearly, it's not a pipe dream, that much I can tell you. It clearly is possible, but it requires a lot of things to fall into place. Especially when we talk about innovation, probably we can discuss more, but it requires an ecosystem to really nurture that. It requires the kind of incentives from the government. It started in a small way when they launched this PRIP scheme, to also encourage people to get into the space. It needs more and more of that, on a much larger scale, in terms of support coming in from government, not purely incentives. I wouldn't say that's the only thing, but also the ecosystem. For example, when we say, regulatory system, that's a clear thing that needs quite a bit of reform to get to that area. If you talk about industry-academic collaboration, it needs a lot more to be done on both sides. Academic and research institutions have to get to the level of, translatability, that the industry can accept by doing the kind of research at a basic stage which the industry would accept. Currently, that's somewhere missing. You would see that. And funding, for example, when it comes to, say, private equity, VC, venture capital funding, that's not a system that currently is there in India because they fund late-stage trials.
Yeah.
You need more in the early stage. But that requires an ecosystem where government also has to pitch in. So it requires a lot more. Infrastructure is another thing, for example. So it requires a whole ecosystem before innovation can get there. But these are things I'm quite sure that in the government will go through.
But before we get to, what we require for innovation, which is basically that ecosystem, do you think that the generic story for drugs is probably dwindling, is probably over? Not over, but dwindling as compared to, say, what we were talking about a decade ago?
So obviously, if you're looking at, just doing the same as what we were doing before, that's not going to get you there in terms of either growth in the generic space itself, or so it requires certain level of, improvement, innovation. That's why I use the word specialty generics. All right, repurposing drugs, getting them in different dosage forms, new indications. All these are again areas where companies are investing into, right? Have already invested. So there's one trajectory there. But having said that, it will never get you to the stage of the ambition that we have, unless we significantly move up the value chain, right? And that's where I'm saying innovation is the key thing there. So generics is there, but it won't get you there. There's biosimilars also. It's a story that still it's unfolding at this point of time, especially in the Western markets. But while that gives an opportunity, it's there for the, I would say, medium term maybe. But in the long term, it's purely innovation that's going to get us there.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to come back to innovation, but, Mr. Stoffel, I just wanted to touch upon the point about biologics that Mr. Reddy spoke about, that the gap is probably widening too much when it comes to biologics or biosimilar capabilities for India vis-a-vis China as well as Korea. Do you think that we've probably missed the bus when it comes to scale, when we're talking about biosimilars and biologics from an Indian standpoint?
I think it's definitely the more difficult place to be compared to small molecules, where in small molecule I see clearly the wealth of established competences, even capacity on the generic side, on the generic API. I see at the moment a significant opportunity to do more CDMO business with the innovators. I think that's the place to go. And I think that exists to the extent that I would say not necessarily on the biologics. And certainly there are significant players in Asia that have established themselves, but I think it's also the industry is not yet ready to the same extent to bring business, innovator business to India as they are. I think that's the next level movement that you can expect now with a good positioning to do in small molecules.
Nandini, do you think that India's story would also be being the innovator for the world as compared to, just being focused on getting that patented drug out of India? We'll probably be a part of the value chain to get multiple patented drugs out, maybe not from an Indian company standpoint, but from a global pharmaceutical company standpoint.
I think absolutely the India story is we've got the infrastructure and the talent to do some of the patented drugs. Some customers are coming to us saying, we are willing to give you our own patent drugs. So I think there is an opportunity for us to grow. As I talked about, even in the backward integration and integrated supply chains, you could be doing some stages here and final stages in the US, but that's kind of how you move up the value chain.
Dr. Chava, I know, your focus for Laurus Labs is always an R&D focused company. That's the kind of vision that you've always had for the company. What do you think India needs to do to probably start innovating? While India could be an innovative hub, what does India need to do to probably get that one molecule out, which would be a patented drug from the country?
So we do a lot of process research. We do incremental research, but we don't do drug discovery except supporting ImmunoAct where they got the CAR T commercialized. For us in the sense as a country to move up in the value chain, we have to start funding universities more. If you look at the global trend, the basic sciences are practiced very well in the universities, and the applied science is practiced very well in the industry. Here, basic sciences are undergoing less investment. Maybe it's not a blame. 5 years back, 10 years back, government priorities are different. Maybe 10 years from now, government priorities will be different. So as the government start funding universities, making universities world class and scale, then basic sciences will get attention. I think when I mean attention, when people get high-paid jobs in basic sciences, people take basic sciences. If they don't get jobs, they don't take basic sciences. As simple as that. When that sector becomes attractive, then government will invest and there is more talent available. And then we can invest. See, drug discovery is not a gamble. So is that you can play a lottery and win. So even if you take it discovery scientist-wise, very few scientists discovered more than one drug. And there are multiple R&D centers for big pharma, and not many R&D centers delivered many drugs. There are some centers in India, they never delivered any drug, for example. So you need deep pockets to get into drug discovery. As G.V. Prasad mentioned in the previous one, they have spent $150 million in the drug discovery. But what they have created ecosystem. That is also very important. So we have to create a very strong ecosystem, and we also have a risk capital. India has only risk. There is no risk capital. If you go to Boston, if you go to California, people can fail 10 molecules, and if they come with a nice idea, 11th idea, they get money. But here in India, you don't get that way. So we need to have a lot of appetite for risk. So we don't have appetite for risk. We only appetite for success. So unless we have appetite for risk, and risk is always associated with reward. So our mindset has to change. Investors' mindset has to change. And government mindset has to change. They have to put billions of dollars. Like NIH, they should fund cutting-edge research. So ICMR or any other institute should spend not 1 crore, 5 crore. They have to spend thousands of crores to build that ecosystem. I think things will change for better. I think we are moving in the right direction, I feel.
Ms. Nevatia, you obviously know Pfizer Global as well as Pfizer India. So you can make that comparison. You've seen the India workings as well as the global workings. What is the difference when it comes to innovation for an Indian company? Yes, risk capital, the ecosystem is lacking. But what needs to probably change incrementally, urgently, according to you, to probably put that impetus on R&D?
I think Dr. Chaya covered a lot of it, but I would just add maybe I'll just take one specific example and then build on what Dr. Chava said. For us in Pfizer, a lot of our basic research is still done outside India, but increasingly the next steps, whether it's formulation research, whether it's safety, whether it's drug safety reporting, clinical trials, a lot of that is now coming to India. So in fact, we have a pretty significant share of total research coming into India. So even for a company like ours, which does the full spectrum, the first things to come to India is still what Indian companies are doing, right? So we also mirror that. But I see that increasingly we are doing a lot more in India, particularly formulation research. But the basic science that Dr. Chava referred to, that is still not done in India, right? Now, you're asking what can change to make that happen. I think you covered a few points. I think what we've seen, a lot of our basic research scientists, they live in an ecosystem where they live and breathe that all the time. There is a very, very high appetite for failure. When we say risk, what does it mean? It's just that we tolerate a lot of failure in the research lab. You fail millions of times until you succeed. That mindset is completely different. The pockets are much deeper. And people are just, they're not doing research on diabetes. They're doing research on a particular pathway. Now, with that pathway, they might go to diabetes, they might go to Alzheimer's, they may go anywhere. That mindset is very different. So I think that's the first thing that needs to happen, is that, that willingness to fail many, many times before you succeed. And when you have so many other opportunities, it's very hard to have that mindset. I mean, I see it for ourselves, right? From a commercial perspective, there are so many opportunities for growth in India. It becomes that much harder to invest in something which is very long term, because the short term opportunities are many, very exciting and very large. So I think it's also the balance. It's not just that we can't do it. It's also that there are many other more short term, immediate term opportunities that need attention, that can create value in the short term, that is very tempting. And so putting money into basic science becomes that much more difficult. So I think that's how I would summarize. It's not just that it can't be done. And some of the points you mentioned, Dr. Chava, in terms of university support, government support, become very critical. But also it's the having the alternatives. The only, the little silver lining I do see is, with the government and its real focus on trying to bolster up the NIPERs, I see that maybe there is some, hope there, because historically the NIPERs weren't really maybe contributing as much. But I think now there's a very clear Center of Excellence for Medical Devices in Ahmedabad, Center of Excellence for Bulk Drugs in Hyderabad. So they are really targeting, they are making them specialized. We visited the one in Ahmedabad. I would encourage many of you to visit these NIPERs. The facilities they have built at the NIPER in Ahmedabad is at least as good, if not even more better than our research facilities in Chennai. I mean, they're spectacular. They've got everything. They just now need throughput. So the infrastructure is there. They need people to come and use their machinery, use their facilities for research. So I think there are steps being taken in the right direction, but it's going to take years. It's not going to happen in the next 5-10 years, I feel.
Okay. Well, Mr. Reddy, exactly on that point, this target that we have of around $130 billion, while we are talking about this ecosystem of R&D that we need to have, can we get to $130 billion in an other alternative model, which is not innovation from an Indian company, but innovation for the globe? Do you think that that is an aspect that we could probably scale up significantly?
No, I think I would still go back to, what my colleagues on the panel have said about, innovation itself. I would still stick to that 130 and say that, innovation will be possible. It requires that, we are talking about all the elements being in place.
But we're just talking about a couple of years from now. The ecosystem has to come up in the next couple of years for us to probably get to those levels.
It does. I mean, all I wanted to say was, it requires some kind of a push, right? It requires the government to also go about it in a mission mode to make this happen, right? So it's only right now industry talking about it. There are some places in the government that's being talked about, but it needs to be taken on a mission mode. Why I say that is, I'll take an example of China, right? Just to illustrate that, that it can be done if it's really taken in that kind of a mode. So where was China when it came to discovery? I told you that we started way back in 92, right? So, and there are a handful of companies, were in the discovery space. They still kept going about it, and they were taking the risks, and it was fraught with uncertainty. So people had to tone down, but people who are persevering because they believe in it, they're continuing. We are now at this stage, so at this point of time where, we are lagging way behind China, because China was not there in 1992 when it came to discovery. Where they're there in 2000, they were not there in discovery. 2010 is when they started the push to reform their entire system on all the dimensions that I talked about earlier. First step, regulatory, right? So they reformed the complete system to be, to bring in regulations, which was again global standards. This is something that, again, I won't get into details because it's all public knowledge on what they did on that. Talk about academic institutions. The places like Tsinghua University and a host of other universities became the hotbed of, building up the necessary skills, which I think Dr. Stefan talked about, which is lacking here, right? You talk about our universities. Are they really, getting enough graduates, who can get on to drug discovery? It's at a very basic stage. It requires a complete revamp of curriculum. Research institutions. Is there funding from the Indian government institutions, there's a lot of funding. DST, DBT, Atal Innovation Mission, for example, all these are still there. But are all these tailored towards this big goal of discovering a drug?
Yeah.
Right? I'm saying these kind of things need to happen because China, you see the results. 10 years since they started all this work, it's like they have a pipeline of drugs. They have licensed out these to multinationals, not just, the selling in China. They also have breakthrough drugs, breakthrough designated drugs, in the US FDA, for example.
Yeah.
They have a venture capital system. If you see the combined value of the biotech companies coming in from China, $200 billion, right? And how did they do this? So I'm saying the potential is there in India. We need to take it at a completely different level, and it is possible.
Yes. Besides just molecules, is there any kind of alternative or maybe, parallel form of R&D that Dr. Reddy's is probably looking at, maybe in medical technology?
Not really, because that's what I'm saying, right? So again, we're in the business of medicines.
Yes.
Right? So that's what we are good at. So we can't get into, say, for example, hospitals or things like that. So that is not an alternative for us. In the space of pharmaceuticals itself, we are there across the value chain, across all the segments. You asked the question saying that, $130 billion. I'm saying that potential can be realized if and only if we have products in the pipeline which can earn sufficient revenues and then put us on the path of innovation. Only then we can get there.
Well, Nandini, your company in particular, Piramal Pharma, doesn't have a focus on R&D within the company itself. You do it by, probably supplying or probably working for innovator companies. Is that probably going to change if in case there are policies which are more conducive by the government?
I think at the moment, the key is to actually help support and enable innovation by innovators. And I think the opportunity there is also immense. So I think, like Satish said, it's part of the whole, it's pharma services and pharma. I think that can help go to the $130 billion because your scientists will also gain experience working with others as well. So you want that ecosystem also to happen because you need a lot of people that are trained in doing innovative drug discovery or even, scale up and process R&D as well.
Is artificial intelligence, Mr. Reddy, helping in terms of expediting the process for discovering a new drug?
No, again, probably Prasad would have spoken about it in his session, right? So even in terms of drug discovery worldwide, again, if you see, there are areas where artificial intelligence is making a big difference. For example, selection of targets, right? So as part of a pharmaceuticals services offering, which probably Akhil would have talked about in the previous session, so there are things that we're able to do using artificial intelligence, which offers better solutions, probably better targets, so that companies can, get on from that particular place. Also in clinical trials, recruitment, for example, or even optimizing the whole clinical trial design, there are spaces in which it's really helping, on a very transformational kind of a basis. And this is something you'll keep seeing more and more in the whole process of drug discovery, over a period of time. It's not that it's like dramatically changed overnight, but you see all those elements in place where it's changing the whole paradigm in terms of, how drug discovery is being done, and you will see more and more of those things.
So do you think that a drug can probably come to market much earlier because
much quicker,
much quicker, the efficacy could be greater simply because of...
Because, even using the design to find the better targets to begin with, that itself is a time saving. Clinical trial, a more optimized design, saves a lot of time because that's where I think more and more time is spent.
And are you all using artificial healthcare, intelligence in origin oncology in any form or manner in terms of R&D?
In some forms, but we're still not there yet because all this started just very recently, right, in terms of use of artificial intelligence. But if you see, for example, in the other parts of the organization, whether it was in the sales force, or I shouldn't say sales force, but more in the science, R&D development also of generics and, various areas, there's a lot of use cases that we have demonstrated, using artificial intelligence.
Okay. Dr. Chava, before we get to another topic, just wanted your thoughts. You have a great investment in ImmunoAct, first CAR-T therapy, which is indigenously made in India, so congratulations on that investment. But we do have a long way to go when it comes to CAR-T cell gene therapy. How difficult a process do you think it is for Indian companies to probably scale up? And what is the future of cell gene therapy in India?
I don't know about the future of cell and gene therapy, India. I'm a chemist, but I will answer the financial related, our investment into ImmunoAct. So at our company, we decided to invest 10% of our profits into technologies which we don't have expertise. The area where we never had any expertise is biotech. We tried to do biocatalysis, enzyme manufacturing thrice, and we failed thrice internally. So we decided not to go organically, and if we want to have talent, we have to acquire talent. So that's the time we invested in bio, the Laris Bio in Bangalore. And our interest started increasing over a period of time when we understood the biology space. This opportunity came, I would say, is serendipity. It's not that we were looking for CAR-T companies. I am very honest in that. So one investment banker came with this idea, and he said, this ticket size is too small. When you are saying you want to invest in disruptive technologies, why don't you invest? We said we did took a decision and completed investment in less than 4 weeks. Then that is the time when they were in phase 1, doing phase 1. We like the knowledge. We like the commitment of the team. Then they want more money to complete the phase 2. And we said we will invest. And we invested at 7x of our initial investment in a 12-month space. That the value for innovation, we were talking about value for innovation. So the failure is definite value, but whereas upside, there is no threshold. So that's the power of innovation. And our interest even gone further, and we tied up with IIT Kanpur in the gene therapy space. That's a long shot. I don't think we are at the preclinical stage right now in the gene therapy space. And we're happy to say we are building our first GMP facility for vectors in IIT Kanpur. So this is a serious commitment we did, but
can ImmunoAct meet the demand that India has?
Yeah, see, when they were doing research in IIT Mumbai, they were doing in 400 square feet area, the 40 square meters. When they want to build commercial facility, they were thinking to put 400 square meters. That's, for them, is a 10x. That's too much for them. Then we were able to put one more zero next to that, because we know what is the need for commercialization. So currently they can do about 500 treatments in a year, and by end of this year, they can do 2,000 treatments in a year. So they are also scaling up well.
Okay. Well, I'm going to shift a little away from R&D as well as and talk about some, topical topics right now. Ms. Nevatia, I wanted to come to you about this. What we've noticed is a lot of the pharma MNCs are looking to probably scale back their operations in India. We heard about Novartis, the strategic review that they're probably going through. We have AstraZeneca, which is selling a manufacturing facility or looking to do that and maybe even get a CDMO on board for that particular facility. Why is it that there is a scale back from a lot of the pharma MNCs within India when it comes to, say, feet on the ground?
Ekta, I'll start by deferring that I don't think it's a universal situation that everyone is trying to scale back. I think it's very much a function of the portfolio that the company has and the willingness to invest in a portfolio that's specific for a country like ours, right? So I think it ends up being about choices, and different companies are making different choices. In our case, we are definitely not looking at a scale back by any stretch of the imagination. I think two things have happened that have led us to the point we are. The first is when we looked at our portfolio and we looked at where the market is going. We are fortunate to have a very extensive portfolio from vaccines to primary care medications to very specialty products. And the scope is huge, particularly when you look at the primary care portion and the vaccine portion. So I think for us, India is now in fact elevated to what we call an anchor market, because we believe that with the breadth of portfolio we have, there is a lot of opportunity. So I think that was my first comment, that the portfolio that the company has and the portfolio that the company wants to invest in right from the global organization is one of the drivers of the choices, right? And if you have a primary care portfolio or a, something like that, then many companies are actually putting more in India. So I think that's the first point. The second is the way we look at investments in India. It's not only about feet on street. Of course it is, but a multinational will never be able to compete the way a Mankind or a Cipla or a Glenmark can in terms of numbers of people. And we don't even think that we should do that. But instead what we want to do is partner with them. Now partnering can be seen as you are not doing it yourself, but the way we see partnering, and we've just announced a partnership with Glenmark, it's the first of its kind because we're going to launch a new product, new molecular entity with a long patent life with Glenmark. They will have a brand, we will have a brand. And we don't see it as a lack of interest in our part. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We want to make this molecule as big as possible, as quickly as possible. And so we've come to the realization that we are much better off doing it with an Indian partner that can actually achieve that scale instead of us building from scratch where we don't have those existing relationships, knowledge of the therapy area, etc. So I think it's about how you see investment, and I think the way we see it is bring more of our products into the country and make them accessible to many more patients as quickly as possible. That's how we see the investment. But again, it's a function of portfolio, it's a function of choices, and that's how different companies are approaching India.
Mr. Reddy, you knew the question's going to come to you. Well, the interest, possibly, you've clarified on Novartis, but, the possibility in a hypothetical situation, does it interest a company such as Dr. Reddy's to probably buy a company such as Novartis? Or would it be more feasible to just pick up the brands or maybe sign a distribution agreement where there is less capex and less outflow of funds involved?
No, I think we also have to see what exactly is the aim of the company, because we prioritized India several years ago, and then among the several things that we did, it's part of those the decisions that we took at that point of time when we say how do we grow in India. Right? And everything else that you said, becomes part of that. So we didn't say that, we have to acquire companies to grow. That was not the intention. We had to say that, in our core therapeutic areas and therapeutic areas of interest, where we need to scale up, where we can do more. So what are the different ways by which we can do it? So if you see, for example, we have products licensed from Amgen for oncology. Because we are already a player in the oncology segment. We launched, some of the biosimilars for the very first time. In the world, not just India. And we launched rituximab, for example, in 2007, and darbepoetin after that. So we had a certain franchise, so we wanted to build on that. So, and then we look at, what arrangements will help us get there. And then to the point about multinationals, right? So there are also, for the reasons that Meenakshi just outlined, they also have taken decisions, compared to, what, would be in their priority to also, exit from some of the brands, in terms of marketing themselves. And that's why you see the deal which we did on Over and the distribution arrangements that we have done. So this is an ongoing effort. It will continue. There will be a process by which we will in-license, products from multinationals for their innovative products. That will continue. We will also look at, products which say, fits into our core therapeutic areas. And then we'll continue with, whatever would be the strategy to go from that. It's a mix of those strategies. I would say it's just one particular thing to do. What makes sense, because again, different parts of the company also compete for resources, right? So that, and we will obviously take decisions based on that.
But deploying so much capital would not be something that you would probably rule out.
No, that's why I said it's about allocation of capital. Right? That's very important for a company. That's why I said there is a certain priority which we attach to India. There is also a priority which we attach to biosimilars, for example, because I talked about its importance in the whole thing. Innovation, I'm saying it's like we are able to take care of that. And there are also several other things which are part of the portfolio, because in terms of what we outlined as Horizon 2, there are digital therapeutics, there are innovative products, of which NC is also one part of it. There's also Neribio, which we launched as part of the digital therapeutics at this point in time. OTC, for example, which also requires a lot of spending. It's again allocation of capital in terms of the returns, in terms of value creation for the company.
Okay, all right. Well, Novartis will go through that strategic review and decide what they want to do with their India arm. But Nandini, you have an OTC portfolio, but you don't want to get back into domestic formulations. Why is that?
I think that we've lost some of the synergies that we had when we were a domestic formulations company. And I think the supply chains, the way we market are just very, very different now. So I think what we'd like to do is get bigger in OTC and reinvest what we're making in terms of EBITDA back into the company.
But would you probably look to scale up your OTC business
Absolutely.
significantly?
Yes, we are looking to scale up.
And would you look at M&A because it's an expensive market?
We would look at brands, but I think prices the last few years have been very high. So again, as Satish said, it's about allocation of capital and can you get a payback from acquisition. And so at some point to look at valuations and say, you know what, it makes more sense to reinvest and grow organically.
Okay. Mr. Stoffel, you have an investment in Suven, which is a CDMO play. Which part of, is that the value chain in the Indian pharmaceutical space that you're probably most bullish on?
I would say so at this moment. We mentioned a couple of dynamics, supply chain challenges, even China -1. But I see that India is extremely well positioned in the generic API business, but virtually limited present with the innovators. And I think there is a sweet spot to advance up the value chain in that space with the innovators. Based on the talent pool, based on the capacity that still can be used for the intermediates, for GMP-regulated steps, to move up and take more on the innovator space. That business is 70, 80 billion worth, and India is still underrepresented in it. And from my point of view, there is a great need to continue the generic API production, but equally so now an opportunity to step up the value chain and again with a very robust and focused backward integration offer a value proposition that no westernized company has and also currently is not coming out of China.
Well, Dr. Sharma, one of the big buzzwords for 2023 and going into 2024 is GLP-1, semaglutide, Wegovy, weight loss, obesity. It's expected to be a $100 billion market soon. How do you think an Indian company can participate in the opportunity?
It is a big opportunity. People are all, 5 years back, obesity was a few $1 billion market. Now, people are not ashamed to say it is a $200 billion opportunity, GLP-1, and people are talking oral GLP-1s. I think our Indian, maybe Swati can throw some light because they have some presence in peptides, but Indian companies' peptide capabilities put together could be a ton. But GLP-1s, what people are talking is tens of tons. So I think there is a great opportunity, but I don't know whether these big pharma have desire to move their GLP-1s to India. We have to wait and see.
Mr. Reddy, what do you think? How do you think the opportunity is probably going to play out for Indian companies when it comes to this $100 billion weight loss diabetes market? And has it changed significantly? Do you expect a complete change in terms of, say, the generic market because of this?
No, it is obviously the biggest opportunity ever, right? So you're talking about the largest market cap of Novo Nordisk, almost equaling, the GDP. So I'm just saying that it's obviously a huge opportunity on the GLP-1 products. When the generic happens, right, when it comes down, so we also have to understand that it's an issue of price, right? That's the one that opens up opportunities, starting with India. And if you also see the other emerging markets, because again, if you see the pricing that happens at this point of time when the product is under patent, when it moves into generic, it again opens up the market and reaches patients, which otherwise is not happening at this point of time, right? So obviously it will open up the market and Indian companies will have a big role to play in it because they always tend to have the competitive advantage.
Yes. So in what way will an Indian company probably participate in the opportunity? What can we hear from Indian companies? Would it be a part of the API chain? Would it be a part of maybe the generic version of it? How is an Indian company going to participate?
Everything, because again, if you see number of companies working on it, not just from India, even in other parts of the world, there's several companies working on these products even as we speak, right? So obviously there is going to be that size of the market. Again, I'm saying, it's like who's able to compete better, in terms of the capability, in terms of the price which they can bring it to the market, and also the timing, so there will be obviously several companies in the race for
Revlimid was a huge opportunity for the industry.
It is.
So if you have to compare what GLP-1 would be for as compared to Revlimid, how much bigger do you think GLP-1 would be?
No, it's different, right? So you're talking about Revlimid, which is for a specific
For
indication.
a specific indication.
It was for a particular,
Yeah.
period of time, when we have that exclusivity. So that's a very different game from what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is the product going generic.
It's the industry, it's this
And then
segment.
and then the whole segment itself,
Yeah.
right? So, because obviously obesity was not recognized as a disease at one point of time, it is, and also the results that it has shown, not just in obesity, but also the other indications which it's coming out, in cardiovascular, in NASH and things like that. So it's a huge opportunity just waiting in front of us.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see how Indian companies participate on that. But Ms. Nevatia, from Pfizer's standpoint, if you could give us some insights in terms of what you all think about the GLP-1 opportunity, and how big is it going to be in terms of in industry and a game changer, say, for the entire pharmaceutical space?
I think irrespective of where you sit, which company, I think it's a huge opportunity, right? So I think we're all, it's just, between the different products, and I think Satish talked about it, at one point Novo's market cap was bigger than Denmark's market GDP. So it's huge, right? But I think it's also a good reminder for us in terms of, when you find that breakthrough, whether it's obesity, whether it's, anti-smoking, there are these areas where still there is huge room for development. I mean, many companies have a lot of research in this space. So I think, of course, the first thing is it bolsters our confidence in continuing to research in that area. We are not present right now in diabetes and obesity, but we're always looking at opportunities there. I think the second is it also is an eye-opener in terms of, finding the right solution for the right problem, right? So, for example, we don't have the obesity kind of opportunity facing us immediately, but when we look at other opportunities specific to India, and I'll take one example, is sickle cell disease. That's an area where we're doing a lot of work, and what we are finding is the unmet need is huge. Now, our assumptions going into the discussion was, will there be an opportunity for this? Are there patients for this? When you actually dig into it, the opportunity is massive. It's latent because people don't want to diagnose themselves. It's not even a known disease in most cases. And I think that's the big aha from the obesity example. Dr. Chava said it. A few years ago, it wasn't even a disease. Now look at what's coming. So I think it just bolsters our confidence to really go after products, molecules, which are meeting a huge unmet need, highly differentiated, because the market is there for us to build. And we as a company have had a great legacy of building markets, and I think that's what this example of semaglutide is a good reminder of.
Okay, well, let's get in some final thoughts now. Nandini, if we have to discuss that $130 billion target for the Indian pharmaceutical space, what are the key themes that will probably play out, the top 3 key themes that will play out for us to probably get to those levels or strive to get to those levels?
I think one is quality and compliance. I think we have to continue to raise the bar on quality and compliance as an industry. I would say talent, and I think the other one is the ecosystem.
Okay, Mr. Reddy?
So I think from what I just talked about, right, from the business point, from the numbers point of view, clearly innovation will get us there. But all the other ones related to innovation, from what my colleagues have spoken about, it's on the service side of it for innovation. It's about the ecosystem part of it that we're talking about. All these elements have to fall into place if you have to get to that space on innovation. There is still a lot of other opportunities which will again lead to this number. Biosimilars also I talked about. It's an opportunity. At the same time, I think there are also the markets, right? So which at this point of time, companies are making big inroads into it. I would say Latin American markets, for example, there are certain markets which still have the potential to be tapped. Japan, for example, which can also be, expand. So there are also the markets point of view, and the bigger thing I think is really what Nandini said. When it comes to talent, I think that will make the big difference, because if we don't scale up on that front, it leads to all the other issues that we're talking about.
I was also reading that the Gulf is turning out to be a big pharmaceutical market for Indian companies. Is that true?
Probably you're talking about Saudi. Obviously,
Yes, Saudi.
I mean, that's why I said that a lot of these markets opening up step by step. Other markets in the GCC are much smaller compared to the in the whole scheme of things. But GCC is the big market. I mean, Saudi is the biggest market. I think the regulatory authorities were in India. They're also looking at ways and means. But again, it's a process, right? So it all depends on how it shapes up. But it is a big opportunity.
Okay, all right. Well, Mr. Stoffel, if we have to get to $130 billion, what do you think would be the key themes which are probably going to play out within the pharmaceutical space, and maybe the top priorities as well for Indian companies?
I mean, I give you my view on the service sector, more in the healthcare and the outside. I mean, locally, India, I leave that to the rest of the speakers. So, again, in order to get closer to the innovators, there is a lot that is there, but I think it needs a clear positioning and value creation proposition. What I see is that there is lots of capacity available for intermediates, again, GMP-regulated steps, but when it comes to the highly regulated and the API steps, I think there are high-end flexible and quality suitable facilities needed. I'm impressed what I've seen, fit for purpose, but when it comes to attract that type of business, I think that is a dimension that needs to be addressed. The second one, and also here I've seen good efforts, but sustainability. I think sustainable production is a global responsibility, and many, or I would say close to all, biotech and pharma companies these days make it a very critical factor in their assessments. So if you don't have a journey to reduce your carbon footprint, you could be at a disadvantage not to be awarded business. I would say that is the second dimension that should be discussed, how that journey can be further be accelerated. And then the third one, I think it was mentioned, is talent. The needed infrastructure. And here there are global examples of countries that have done a tremendous job to address or attract this service business that can be taken reference on.
Okay, Ms. Nevatia?
I'd say two things that, from a government, and one that is more kind of companies can do. I think from a government perspective, regulatory reform, I think it's happening, but the reason I bring that up is the amount of time it takes to launch new products in the country, the expectations of doing trials specific for India, the entire process of regulatory, that has to keep improving. I think it's really quite, actually the last 1 year has been very positive, but it really needs to keep at that, because right now we need to do a specific India study for every product, which at some point starts becoming unsustainable, and it means it takes us at least 4 years to launch a drug in India from when it launches in the US. So that's one that has to change for more products to come to India. I think the second is access, and I'm sure that is something all of us face, is in principle Ayushman Bharat is great, but in reality when you look at how many innovative therapies are actually in Ayushman Bharat available to patients who are members of Ayushman Bharat, the numbers are very few. And I think we need to make a lot more effort to have the right pricing, but then also there needs to be that mindset of getting a lot more innovative therapies, because the domestic market can only grow when there is more access. So I think those would be two where we need to really have the government and work with the government on. I think the third, I would say from a company, is partnerships. I think we live in a world where there is this Indian company and MNC divide, and it comes up on every occasion. But there are many MNCs who don't see themselves as MNCs. We see ourselves as an Indian company. We are listed here. And there are many Indian companies who see themselves as MNCs, right? So I think we have to get over that divide and really work as partnerships between, MNCs, Indian companies, industry, academia. I think that needs to totally lift, because right now we're living too much in our divided worlds.
Okay, Dr. Java, we'll end it with you. Your brief thoughts. $130 billion, what are the key themes?
Pardon?
$130 billion in terms of a market size for the pharmaceutical space. The key themes which will probably play out to get to those levels.
I think in the pharmaceutical space, I think everyone is talking about the going up in the value chain. That can only be achieved if we think compliance is king. I think nothing else is more important than compliance. Once you do that, speed, scale, ESG comes number 2, 3, 4. I think if we neglect compliance, I think the rest of the things could be 1,000, but you are multiplying that 1,000 by 0, so it will become 0. So I think we have to look at compliance as the king. Nothing else is more important.
Okay. All right. Well, insightful takeaways from this conversation, but we just have a couple of minutes for maybe a couple of audience questions, maybe 2 or 3 at this point, so we can circulate. Yeah, go ahead. If you could just say it loudly.
Hello?
Oh, okay.
Okay, this one is working. Oh, maybe just my luck. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your thoughts. It's pretty insightful. So since morning we are talking about innovation, and while going through all the discussion, I got a little confused with where should be the focus of this innovation. Since last 15 years, I've actually worked with innovative pharma company thanks to the various GCCs and the offshore solution model. So when it comes to innovation, where should be the focus? Is it more we are thinking from an export point of view, or is it more from a domestic point of view? And if it's domestic, do you think the India market, is it ready for it? Because when we talk about China, then it's not only about the export, it's also about how they strengthen their domestic market. Thank you.
Mr. Reddy?
So again, going by the China example, right? So it was just the initial part, where the government said that they will reimburse as part of the list products innovated in China. So that gave them a ready market. So people who wanted to innovate, they came out with Me Too products, if you're asking about the focus. That was just a starting point. But see where they ended up 10 years later. They actually have products licensed out to multinationals. They have products at the breakthrough designation, at the FDA. They've really moved up pretty quick. So again, it depends on, the context in which the innovation is working, based on, how the country wants to take it forward. If I talk specifically about companies, I talked about our company. We were in diabetes at that point of time because that was a certain vision which our founder had at that point of time, because those class of compounds were just about to get into the market. We started with glitazones at that time, so that's something he was, saw as an opportunity, and we almost got towards success towards that in terms of getting to the market. But having failed there, we also stepped into oncology area, but that was something which happened over a period of time, and we kept focusing down to say that we will only look at oncology. That's why I even named this company as Origin Oncology. Again, it depends on company to company, depends on the context on which you're working on, and what makes sense at that point of time.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good evening, guest. This is Flyden from Naipa, Hyderabad. My first question, just recently Orchid Pharma got a new chemical entity approval of XBLFF. Do you think this could be a new dawn for the pharma industry in India? And also adding to this, a lot of companies like Novo Nordisk, GSK have the global capability centers here, but none of them are interested in having the R&D centers. This is probably because of the talent pool that is lacking. As a graduate, as a student of NIPA, we find that there is a lot of issues, like there is funding which comes, but it's a bit slow when it comes, for example, a certain API or a certain raw material. To have it, it takes like months and months of time to get it approved from the ministry. So should the pharma companies step in, take some extra risk with funding, and also come into innovative drugs?
Dr. Chava, do you want to answer that?
Maybe Nandini could be better.
Nandini?
Okay. I think there is as a CDMO, I think our focus is on manufacturing and less on actually doing innovation, because I think that the challenge is paying for innovation. I think we as a company tried for 18 years to do innovation and failed. So at there is a balance between what investors expect and how you can fund innovation.
So,
Does anyone else want to answer that? Any more questions?
no, like I would like to know a bit now from Meenakshi ma'am, maybe Pfizer, like about she had spoken about how NIPERs are there, but then there is NIPERs also have an issue of, since it's the governments that are funding, the funding goes very late. So should the companies be taking risks and venturing into, like, say, have their own lives, their own institute, for example, a Pfizer college or something like that, where where you can see a faster, because in China, for example, a lot of companies are having the R&D centers. Even despite the geopolitical tensions, AstraZeneca did not leave China, and even Merck is present in China. So they are having the new chemical entities from the academic institute and then launching it in a worldwide. So what is your view on this, ma'am?
No, fair question. I mean, in fact, just today we've announced a partnership with NIPER Ahmedabad where we will fund 6 startups there. But we were able to do that because, Ahmedabad is focused on medical technology, and so there's no conflict of interest. So I think starting out, companies want to make sure that they're doing it in a way that, is arm's length, and we've just done that today. So for sure, the intent is there to do public-private partnerships that in the future can fuel our own pipeline as well. But it's just, I think everyone's just treading carefully because so far we've not seen a lot of new research coming out of NIPER. The intentions are very positive now. We see very good leadership in the NIPERs, and so now the confidence is there to put the investments. So I think it's a matter of time, I would say. I mean, I don't want to, Pfizer college of something is what you described. I mean, that is a few years away. But definitely the intention is exactly that, the public-private partnerships. And to your earlier question on GCCs, I think a lot of companies, I know for ours for sure, we're not doing basic research, which was the earlier question, but definitely R&D is a very big word, right? There are many aspects of research. So a lot of the formulation research, a lot of the manufacturing research, all that is starting to happen in India. And we are able to attract the best of the best graduates. So I think it is starting. It's happening for the last few years. So I feel it's a matter of time. We want to get there faster, but I think everyone's making the right steps.
Thank you.
Ekta, here, Chakravarti.
Yeah, just before that, I
just wanted to add one point, because since you're from NIPER, so both myself and Dr. Satyanarayana had the good fortune. I was the former chairman of the Board of Governors of NIPER. He's the current chairman of the Board of Governors of NIPER Hyderabad. So at least we can answer with some conviction on what goes on from both sides, right? So I think the important point is, it's like you're saying, it's like the hurdles that you face. But again, we are trying to find solutions. You've also seen the change, what happened in NIPER Hyderabad, from what happened when they appointed people from the private industry to get onto it, and also the support that we received from the Department of Pharmaceuticals, which is pretty much the owner of, NIPERs, right? So you saw a fresh thrust. So, I mean, let's still go with optimism, saying that things can move, but to get the kind of results that you're talking about, it can't be a simple solution saying that, will Pfizer set up a college, or, for example, even Dr. Reddy's, has funded something called the Institute of Life Sciences in Hyderabad. It's at the cutting edge in terms of some of the things that it has done because of the resources that we put in and also the kind of talent that we're able to attract, right? So when it comes to NIPER, right, it's a big agenda. They're going systematically about it. And I'm quite sure that it will move much faster than what it is today. Of course, more and more steps, but it's a long, detailed number of things that need to be done. But do have hope on NIPERs, certainly.
Okay, well, I think we've completely run out of time unless someone can answer the question in 30 seconds. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Ekta, the road to $130 billion, it's domestic as well as exports also. Actually, the question to Satish and a few more legends like Chava and other people also. The new markets, when you said, Satish has already told, the LATAM and African markets, they're opening up, but the trust needs to be built up. For example, automobile is a big success there, but they wanted a partly investment there. It's not just exporting all along. And now the ecosystem is better than 10 years ago. The political stability has come in some countries. And GCC, when you talk about, it is not the market of the GCC alone in Saudi. When you have a manufacturing place, your manufacturing there, you can supply to the whole world, and they have a trust coefficient more than India. I'm sorry to say this. This is what happening in my observation when I'm touring all the countries in the recent past. This is one. In the domestic market, if you want to scale up, tier 3, I think there is still a lot of scope. I think people are not really looking into it. So these two areas need to be looked into. This is my question and also observation.
No, you're right. Again, the way I talked about, that $130 billion in answer to, what Ekta was asking, is also to say that there are different aspects to it. I just classified it at a very broad level what those are, and also mentioned about Latin America because it's again a market which, Indian companies have been there before, and now they see a lot of opportunities opening up because we also started pretty late, right? But then it's like it's one of our very fast-growing markets, and from there we're able to expand from Brazil to Colombia to Chile.
Even the African markets are open.
Lots of those, and Africa, like you said, is a different story. You also have to, localize, set up a local facility, also in GCC. So again, each country offers different opportunities in the current context in which you operate, right? But I'm just saying it's only one piece of it.
Yes, yes.
But there are bigger pieces that need to be filled if you have to reach that 130. It's not easy, but certainly can be done.
Understand.
Okay, all right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in on this panel, and thank you for all the insights that we got.
Thank you to our esteemed panelists for sharing their thoughts on this pertinent topic. I'd like to invite Mr. Milind Ravi, CEO RX Propellant, to come on stage and felicitate our speakers. Yes, you may.